When people in the mountains of southern Oregon talk about the strangest families to ever live out there, the Utes twins always rise to the top of the list, not because they were violent at first, or even openly cruel, but because of how quietly everything unfolded. Their story didn't erupt the way a scandal does in a big city. It grew the way rot grows inside a tree. Invisible, slow, patient. By the time anyone noticed the smell, the damage had already reached the core. Phoebe and Wilbur Utes were born in 1875, the only children of Elias and Margaret Utes, a couple known for keeping to themselves long before their daughter and son took isolation to another level. The Utes' property sat deep in the woods near Crater Lake, far from the nearest settlement. Reaching it required hours of walking through tangled pines and uneven soil. Winter snow sealed the area so completely that the family often went months without a single visitor. The children grew up seeing more deer than people. Locals used to say that twins often share a strange bond, but Phoebe and Wilbur took that bond to an unsettling extreme. They dressed the same into adulthood. They finished each other's sentences. They slept in the same room until they were nearly 30. Whenever someone tried to strike up a conversation with one of them, the other watched from behind a tree or corner, silent and unblinking, as if assessing whether the stranger was a threat. Even as children, they seemed fused by something stronger than blood. Their parents died only 5 months apart, leaving the twins alone on the land that had trapped them since birth. Instead of selling the property or moving closer to town, they doubled down on their isolation. They stopped attending church. They stopped coming to general stores. They grew their own food, hunted their own meat, and repaired their own buildings. The only time anyone saw them in town after 1897 was to buy a wagonload of lumber and several crates of medical supplies. Medical supplies. That was the detail people remembered later. By the time 1900 arrived, rumors had already started drifting across the mountains. Smoke rising from the Utes' property at strange hours. Sounds that didn't match anything from the forest. Lantern light in places where no structure should be. Once, a postal rider swore he heard the crying of a baby coming from the trees at dawn. When he followed the sound, it vanished. No footprints. No broken undergrowth. Just cold morning air and a silence that made him ride away faster than he ever had. But the Utes twins never denied anything. They never explained anything. They never even acknowledged the whispers. Instead, they built a large wooden structure behind their house, a building no one in the area had seen before. It was long, narrow, and windowless, like a barn without a purpose. A hunter who wandered onto the edge of the property claimed he heard muffled voices inside it, soft, high-pitched, childlike. When he called out to ask if anyone needed help, Wilbur appeared at the doorway holding a shotgun. The hunter didn't wait to confirm the threat. He ran until the trees blurred into streaks. People in town joked nervously about the twins, but no one thought to intervene. These were the early 1900s. Ridge communities minded their own business. Folks believed that if the Utes siblings wanted to live tucked away from the rest of the world, they should be left to it. Besides, no one wanted to be the one to confront them. Something about those two made even the bravest woodsmen uneasy in a way they couldn't explain. Still, isolation has a way of amplifying every strange behavior, and the Utes' property soon became its own riddle. Chickens went missing from surrounding farms. A prospector said he saw Wilbur digging at night behind the new building. Another man reported seeing Phoebe walking through the woods with a child beside her, but when he blinked, the child wasn't there. Some thought it was a trick of the light. Some thought it was a ghost story. Some thought it was lunacy. But the rumor that stirred the most discomfort started in 1902, when the local midwife, a woman named Henrietta Wolfe, told her sister something that made its way through the mountains one whisper at a time. She claimed Phoebe came to her in secret, asking questions no woman should ask a midwife unless she was expecting a child. Not one child, several children. Henrietta said Phoebe's tone was wrong, detached, clinical. She didn't ask about feeding or swaddling or fevers. She asked about bone growth, organ size, how long an infant could survive without maternal contact. She asked how often a baby cried when left alone in a dark room. Henrietta refused to answer most of the questions and asked who the father was. That was when Phoebe's expression shifted into something that chilled the midwife to her core. Not shame, not fear, not confusion, but a quiet confidence, as if she had rehearsed the moment and expected that question all along. "We don't concern ourselves with the father in our family," Phoebe said. "Wilbur and I handle what needs to be handled." She left on foot without another word. Henrietta told no one at first. She didn't think anyone would believe her, but she also couldn't stop thinking about the Oots twins and their large windowless building. Eventually she told her sister, who told her husband, who told the sheriff during a night of whiskey. The sheriff brushed it off as mountain gossip. Even so, the story had already taken root. By the summer of 1903, everyone sensed something was wrong on that property. They didn't know what, but they felt it the way animals feel a storm long before it hits. The forest around the Oots land grew strangely silent. Birds avoided the area. Tracks of deer and elk seemed to divert around the property in unnatural curves. Hunters complained the air felt heavier near the tree line, like the forest was holding its breath. Then came the disappearance. A trapper named Homer Mixon vanished while checking his line near the edge of the twins' land. His footprints led straight toward the Oots property and then stopped. When searchers reached the house, Wilbur answered the door with the same cold stare he had given the hunter years earlier. He claimed he hadn't seen Homer, claimed he and Phoebe had heard nothing unusual, claimed they were busy with indoor work. After Homer Mixon vanished, the sheriff made one obligatory visit to the Oots property. It lasted less than 15 minutes. He walked up the dirt path, knocked on the door, exchanged a few quiet words with Wilbur, and left without stepping inside. Some people said the sheriff was lazy. Others said he was frightened. But most, secretly, believed what the mountains already knew. The Oots place had crossed from strange into dangerous, and no one wanted to be the one who confirmed it. For a short while, life in the surrounding towns pretended to go back to normal. People returned to their chores, their hunting, their children. But conversation always circled back to the same uneasy topic. Why had the twins bought so much lumber? What were they building? How many medical crates arrived at their door? And why did Phoebe walk with a slight limp now, as if recovering from childbirth? 3 different hunters reported seeing smoke rising from the back building at night. Not regular smoke, thick, rolling, almost oily smoke. One man said it smelled like burnt cloth. Another swore it smelled like something far worse, something that made him gag and walk away. No one investigated. The mountains had their own rules, and the Oots property had become a boundary line everyone felt rather than saw. But whispers are not fences. By late autumn, the rumors reached the one man who refused to ignore them, Dr. Clarence Benson, a country doctor with a reputation for stubbornness. He treated everyone from loggers to miners to families who lived so deep in the woods that most people thought their cabins were legends. He did not care about gossip. He cared about patterns, and the pattern around the Oots twins was unmistakable. He arrived at the sheriff's office one cold morning and asked why so many people had disappeared near the twins' land over the past 2 years. The sheriff shrugged it off, saying hunters get lost, storms hit fast, and mountain lions roam thicker in those woods than most folks realize. But Dr. Benson wasn't convinced. "That family has secrets," he said. "Then let them keep them," the sheriff replied. That should have been the end of it. But something in the doctor's conscience refused to settle. He had lived through enough tragedies to recognize the early tremors of one. And so, on a fog-draped afternoon in November, he made the decision that would cost him everything. He rode toward the Oots property alone. The first thing he noticed was the silence. Forests were never silent. Even in winter, birds chirped, branches cracked, animals rustled unseen through brush. But the Oots land was quiet in a way that felt unnatural. The air felt thick, as if saturated with something invisible. Even his horse resisted moving forward, muscles tensed, ears pinned back. He tied the reins at the edge of the property and walked the rest of the way. As he approached the house, He heard faint sounds coming from the long wooden building behind it. Soft, high, repeating in uneven intervals, not animal sounds, not machinery, human sounds, small ones. The doctor froze, then he heard something else. A sharp thud, a muffled cry, a frantic scratching. His heart dropped. He moved closer. That was when Wilbur stepped out from behind the corner of the structure, holding an axe over his shoulder like someone carrying a simple tool. His face was completely calm. He looked at the doctor the way a man looks at something he had been expecting. "We don't have visitors," Wilbur said. "I heard children." The doctor replied. "Not children," Wilbur corrected. "Subjects." Before Dr. Benson could question him further, Phoebe appeared in the doorway of the long building. She wore a stained apron. Her sleeves were rolled to her elbows. Her hands were covered in something Dr. Benson prayed was mud, though he knew better. She smiled with a quiet, eerie warmth. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I need to see what's inside that building." "You're a doctor," she replied. "You should understand better than anyone." "Understand what?" He stepped forward anyway. Wilbur blocked his path. "We're working. Important work. Work that no one else is doing. Work that will answer questions people have been afraid to ask." Dr. Benson didn't retreat. "Where are the children?" The twins did not answer. They only glanced at each other, as if communicating silently in a language built long before words. Then Phoebe said, "They're where they belong." The doctor had seen enough. He turned, intending to return to town, to gather help, to force the sheriff to confront whatever horrors the twins were hiding. But he only made it 10 steps. Because that was when he heard it again, a sound that froze the blood inside his veins. A child calling for help, weak, afraid, and close. Dr. Benson turned back. "If you don't let me inside that building, I'll bring every man in this county." Phoebe tilted her head. "No, doctor, you won't." Wilbur moved fast. Too fast for a man his size. The blow came before the doctor even processed the movement. The world folded into darkness. It took the search party nearly 4 weeks to look for him. By then, winter storms had erased most tracks. His horse was found wandering near the tree line, but Dr. Benson was never seen again. The sheriff insisted the doctor must have gotten lost in the mountains. The townsfolk knew better. But no one dared return to the Utes' property, and so the twins were left alone with whatever lived behind those walls. Then, almost like a response from the forest itself, strange things began happening around the land. Trees near the property started to bend in unusual ways, their trunks contorted as if twisted by unseen hands. Snow melted faster there, revealing patches of soil disturbed by digging. Some nights, distant lantern light flickered between the trees long after the twins had extinguished lights in the house. More unsettling were the sounds. Travelers spoke of faint crying drifting across the woods. Children's voices, some pleading, some whispering, some calling for a mother no one ever found. Experienced hunters turned back from the area without firing a single shot, claiming the woods felt wrong, as if the shadows were watching. And then there was the night a logger named Samuel Pierce claimed he saw small figures moving past the windows of the long building. Short shapes, thin, wrongly proportioned, as if they were children who had been kept somewhere they shouldn't have been. Word spread fast. People wanted answers, but no one wanted to be the person who knocked on that door. The Utes twins, meanwhile, remained calm, smiling, going about their days with the same unsettling routine, because they knew what no one else did. Their subjects were only the beginning, and the dynasty they were building had only just begun. By the end of 1905, the Utes twins had fully transformed their property into something unrecognizable. From the outside, it still resembled a large, isolated mountain home, but anyone who entered, or dared to imagine what was happening behind closed doors, would see a structure turned inward, a labyrinth designed for secrecy, control, and obsession. Every wall seemed to hold a purpose, every floorboard unlock a design and a plan no one else could fully comprehend. Waldo Utes, once the unquestioned patriarch, began to feel like an intruder in his own home. Each morning he awoke to find changes, new locks, reinforced doors, rooms shuttered from his sight. He noticed that the twins moved differently now, coordinating with silent signals that Waldo could not decipher. They whispered incessantly, not in words but in codes that carried warnings, instructions, or perhaps confessions of the horrors being enacted within the house. The fourth child, a boy born in 1906, presented itself as something far more unsettling than mere deformity. Physically normal at first glance, his behavior was chilling. He rarely cried, moved with mechanical precision, and stared with empty, unblinking eyes that seemed to miss the world entirely. Waldo tried to interact with him, but the boy's mind appeared absent, locked away in a realm only the twins could enter. Waldo's own health began to deteriorate. Sleep became a fragmented nightmare, filled with incomprehensible sounds, scratching, low moans, the dragging of objects across the wooden floors. He awoke drenched in sweat, sometimes thinking he could trace the source of the noises to the basement, only to find it locked and silent. Over the months, Waldo lost weight, his hands trembled, and he found it increasingly difficult to focus on his work at the sawmill. The few laborers he hired remarked on his haunted demeanor, a man always on the edge of panic, his eyes darting toward shadows only he could perceive. By late 1906, Phoebe's fifth pregnancy brought with it a new level of tension. The twins grew increasingly anxious, shrouding their activities in secrecy, keeping meticulous notebooks, and making repeated trips to town to acquire unknown supplies. Reports began to reach Dr. Benson, who had avoided the property since Homer Mixon's disappearance. A lumberjack claimed to hear multiple voices, human yet inhuman, echoing from the house in the pre-dawn hours. A traveling merchant spoke of seeing Wilbur carrying a bundle into the basement, something that wriggled and emitted muffled sounds. When the merchant attempted to intervene, Wilbur's threatening gestures forced him back. Rumors of disappearances began accumulating in the surrounding region. A shepherd vanished for 3 days, only to reappear wandering the forest, muttering incoherently about voices in the basement and children who should not exist. The fifth child, a girl born in 1907, revealed more severe deformities than any before. She required constant care and could not communicate in conventional ways. Waldo occasionally heard her cries, but any attempt to locate her was met with immediate obstruction by the twins. They had become hyperprotective of certain sections of the house, particularly the basement and a few upstairs rooms. Dr. Benson, during this period, noticed a troubling discrepancy in the birth records of the region. Based on what he knew of Phoebe's pregnancies, there should have been at least 5 children living on the property, yet only 2 were officially registered. This suggested a deliberate concealment that went beyond shame or fear. The twins were not simply hiding children, they were conducting experiments, using their own offspring as living subjects. Evidence surfaced that they had ordered books on heredity, human development, and anatomical treatises from distant cities. Waldo's sense of displacement grew daily. The twins made decisions without consulting him, set boundaries in the house he could not cross, and behaved increasingly like owners of the property rather than his siblings. The sixth and final pregnancy, occurring in late 1908, left Waldo barely informed. By the time the child was born in early 1909, he never even saw her. The twins' secrecy and territoriality had reached its peak. Observations of the property from the surrounding forest revealed a chilling routine. Wilbur and Phoebe made frequent night trips to the basement, carrying food, buckets, and cloth. Sometimes they removed containers and buried their contents in the forest. In December 1912, Dr. Benson decided to confront the situation directly. He announced a medical visit to the property under the guise of professional necessity. Benson never returned. His carriage was later found abandoned, horses still harnessed but clearly distressed, and his instruments scattered as if he had fled in terror. The twins, maintaining their eerie calm, feigned concern for his welfare. To those who knew them well, a subtle change was perceptible. A cold confidence now emanated from their eyes, a mark of mastery over any threats to their control. With Dr. Benson's disappearance, the legend surrounding the Oots property solidified. It became universally understood in Crater Lake that the house was not merely inhabited, but controlled by forces beyond normal comprehension. The sheriff had avoided the property for a decade, but by 1913, pressure mounted. Families inquiring about missing relatives, letters from the governor, and increasing local nervousness forced Sheriff Schuyler Tucker to act. On March 15, 1913, Tucker arrived with deputies and a county representative. The property, already decaying, radiated an unnatural stillness. No wind rustled the branches, no animals dared enter, and even the light seemed reluctant to touch the property. Phoebe and Wilbur, still appearing youthful at 29, welcomed the search party with a synchronized smile that chilled Tucker to his core. They had anticipated the visit. The search revealed the horrors Waldo had witnessed in fragments but could never fully comprehend. Reinforced doors, barred windows, and heavy locks suggested a house more like a prison than a home. Upstairs, Tucker found evidence of the twins, obsessive documentation, anatomical drawings, family trees, charts tracking traits across generations, and detailed notes referring to children by numbers and characteristics rather than names. In a small, windowless room, Tucker discovered a girl of approximately 9 years old. She bore severe physical deformities, malnourishment, and signs of prolonged confinement. Upstairs and downstairs, rooms contained more children, each in progressively worse conditions. Some were physically stunted, others mentally incapacitated, and the youngest bore the signs of untreated injury and psychological trauma. The basement, fully converted into a series of locked rooms, revealed the scope of the twins' calculated cruelty. There were jars with unknown liquids, rudimentary instruments, and notes detailing behavioral experiments to deprivation, isolation, and control. The twins' own methods for removing threats, such as Homer Mixon and Dr. Benson, were documented with predatory precision. Every step, every trap, had been premeditated and executed without remorse. Waldo Oates, found malnourished and psychologically broken, had tried in vain to resist and record these horrors. His markings on beams, his whispered warnings had been ignored. Phoebe and Wilbur were arrested in March 1913, their calm and unrepentant demeanor only intensifying public shock. The surviving children, removed from the property, were irrevocably scarred. Their physical and mental capacities were permanently impaired, a haunting testament to the twins' years of systematic abuse. Yet even in prison, Phoebe and Wilbur maintained that their actions were scientifically justified, that one day their work would benefit humanity. The arrest of Phoebe and Wilbur Oates in March 1913 sent shockwaves through Crater Lake. Even those who had long suspected something amiss could hardly comprehend the reality of what had been uncovered. A courtroom soon became the stage for one of the most disturbing cases in Oregon history. The twins' cold, calculated actions, meticulously planned over nearly a decade, ensured the trial would draw attention far beyond the region. Curious spectators, journalists, and legal experts flocked to witness the proceedings, driven by morbid fascination as much as a desire for justice. Prosecutors presented damning evidence: the hidden rooms, the documented experiments on their own children, and the fates of Homer Mixon and Dr. Clarence Benson. They revealed the extensive journals detailing behavioral experiments, deprivation, forced confinement, and psychological conditioning conducted on children who were meant to be protected and loved. Photographs of malnourished children, charts, and anatomical sketches painted a grim picture of systematic cruelty and obsession with heredity. The defense attempted to argue that Phoebe and Wilbur were victims of isolation themselves, their minds warped by a lifetime spent in the remote mountains and by their own consanguineous upbringing. Experts testified about the effects of extreme seclusion on human cognition, the potential hereditary influences on their behavior, and the psychological distortions that could arise from obsessive study of abnormal traits. However, the prosecution emphasized the meticulous nature of the twins' plans. These were not impulsive acts of madness or desperation. They were deliberate, premeditated, and methodically executed over years. Every child was cataloged, observed, and manipulated according to carefully devised experiments. Even the disappearances of adults like Mixon and Benson were calculated steps to protect their research. The jury was presented with a chilling portrait of two individuals utterly detached from empathy, treating their own children as laboratory specimens rather than human beings. The trial drew intense media coverage. Newspapers detailed the hidden rooms, the sickly children, and the meticulous notes that revealed a terrifying obsession with human development and heredity. Public outrage grew as the scope of the twins' crimes became known. Witnesses recounted eerie encounters, strange lights and sounds from the house, and the pervasive sense of dread that had long surrounded the Oates property. Ultimately, the verdict was unanimous: guilty on multiple counts, including murder, aggravated child abuse, and unlawful confinement. Phoebe and Wilbert were sentenced to life imprisonment. Even behind bars, they remained resolute, convinced that history would one day recognize the scientific value of their work. They never admitted wrongdoing and showed no empathy for the suffering they had caused. Waldo Oates, the father and once observant patriarch, never recovered. Found in a state of severe mental collapse on the property, he had been confined and manipulated for years, his attempts to intervene thwarted at every turn. After the trial, he was committed to a state asylum, spending his remaining years haunted by the sounds and visions of the Oates property. He died in 1918, tormented by memories of what had unfolded under his roof. The surviving children faced grim futures. The eldest girl, who had spent much of her life confined, never learned to walk properly and spent her life in institutional care. The 8-year-old boy, despite slight improvements under dedicated care, never developed beyond the mental capacity of a young child. The two youngest suffered the worst fates. The 7-year-old girl died 2 years after rescue due to complications from years of neglect, while the youngest boy lived until 15 but never fully adapted, dying during a severe panic episode. The Oates property itself became a ghostly symbol. After the trial, it was abandoned and fell into ruin. In 1920, it was destroyed by fire. Accounts vary on whether lightning struck or if it was arson, but the destruction did little to erase the legend. The bodies of Homer Mixon and Dr. Clarence Benson were never recovered, and the twins took the secret of their final resting places to their graves. In the years that followed, the story of the Oates twins became a cautionary legend in the Oregon mountains. Hunters and travelers reported strange sounds in the area where the house had stood, muffled cries, scratching, and ghostly moans carried by the wind. Trees in the area grew twisted and sickly, and wildlife avoided the region entirely. Older residents whispered of a lingering malevolence, a residue of human cruelty that had seeped into the land itself. The legend of Phoebe and Wilbert Oates serves as a grim reminder of humanity's capacity for evil when isolation, obsession, and warped ideology converge. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths, that monstrosity does not always come from the supernatural, and that the deepest horrors often arise from cold, rational minds capable of meticulously planned cruelty. The twins' inability to recognize the suffering they caused reveals a fundamental disconnection from human empathy, a chilling illustration of how obsession can override moral instinct. Even today, the Oregon mountains hold countless secrets, their dense forests concealing forgotten horrors. The story of the Oates twins endures, a testament to the dangers of unchecked isolation and the terrible consequences of a mind divorced from compassion. Visitors to Crater Lake may pass silently through its ancient woods, unaware that the echoes of history carry lessons in human cruelty. And if you listen closely on the quietest nights, some claim you can still hear faint cries drifting through the wind, a haunting echo of the dynasty of terror once created by two siblings whose ambitions turned their own children into instruments of inhuman study. The tale of Phoebe and Wilbert Oates is not just a story of crime. It is a story of the fragility of moral compass in isolation, the dangers of rationalizing cruelty, and the enduring impact of human actions on generations yet to come. It remains an eternal warning: evil often hides in plain sight, conducted in silence, behind facades of normality, and sometimes the most monstrous acts are those born of human hands. After the destruction of the Oates property in 1920, Crater Lake slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. But for those who remembered the horrors of the Oates twins, normalcy was always relative. The forest, scarred by nearly 2 decades of cruelty and obsession, never fully healed. Trees grew twisted and gnarled. their shapes warped in a way that seemed almost purposeful, as if nature itself bore witness to the atrocities committed there. Wildlife avoided the area entirely, leaving the land eerily silent, a natural barrier that seemed to preserve the memory of what had transpired. Stories of the twins' deeds continued to circulate, long after Phoebe and Wilbert had died in prison. Elders in Crater Lake told children of the cursed house on the mountain, warning them never to stray too far from the main paths. Hunters reported hearing strange noises, even decades later, muffled cries, scratching sounds, and fleeting glimpses of shadowy figures near where the house had once stood. Though many dismissed these accounts as superstition, the pattern of fear was undeniable. Even seasoned outdoorsmen described an inexplicable unease in the area, a sense of being watched, of human malevolence lingering in the air. The surviving children, once hidden away in the twins' improvised laboratories, lived out their lives under strict care, their experiences shaping the understanding of abuse, neglect, and trauma in the region. Their suffering became a somber case study in human cruelty and the long-term effects of isolation. Mental health practitioners who later reviewed the case described it as one of the most extreme examples of deliberate child abuse, combined with twisted rationalization of science they had ever encountered. The legend of the Oates twins became more than just a story of crime. It evolved into a cautionary tale, a warning about the dangers of unchecked obsession and the horrifying extremes of human experimentation. Scholars, folklorists, and true crime enthusiasts examined the case, piecing together the timeline of disappearances, the documented experiments, and the ultimate consequences for the family. Yet, for all the research and investigation, certain questions remained unanswered. The locations of the bodies of Homer Mixon and Dr. Clarence Benson were never discovered. What truly happened to them remained a mystery, a lingering shadow that added to the legend's macabre allure. Modern visitors to the area report a strange stillness in the woods, a silence that feels almost unnatural. Some claim to hear faint echoes of children crying or scratching at hidden walls, though no structure remains. The wind seems to carry the memories of past horrors, whispering through twisted branches and thick undergrowth. For the people of Crater Lake, the story of Phoebe and Wilbert Oates serves as a chilling reminder that the most dangerous monsters are often human, and that isolation can conceal unimaginable crimes. In reflecting on the Oates twins, historians and psychologists alike have noted a series of unsettling truths. Evil does not always manifest in overt acts of violence. It can be systematic, methodical, and rationalized under the guise of science or duty. Obsession can distort morality to such an extent that horrific acts are not only justified, but celebrated in the perpetrator's mind. And finally, the legacy of trauma, the physical, psychological, and societal impact, can linger long after the perpetrators are gone, affecting generations who had no direct contact with the crimes themselves. Today, the legend of the Oates twins endures in books, articles, and retellings on platforms that explore dark history and true crime. It is a story that challenges the boundaries of morality, forces reflection on the depths of human depravity, and reminds us that horror often comes from within. The mountains of Oregon, silent and watchful, hold the echoes of a past that refuses to fade, a legacy of cruelty, secrecy, and obsession that continues to haunt even a century later. Even as new generations walk past the site where the house once stood, few dare to linger. The story is remembered not just for its gruesome details, but for the enduring lesson in the quietest, most isolated corners of the world. Evil can flourish, unnoticed and unchecked, leaving a shadow that stretches far beyond the lives it directly touches. The Oates twins are gone, but their dark imprint remains, a testament to the dangers of obsession, isolation, and the horrifying extremes of human ambition. Though the Oates property was destroyed, and the twins long gone, the mountains of Oregon never fully released their grip on the horror that had occurred there. Local folklore keeps the story alive, passed down through whispered warnings and the uneasy glances of those who venture too close to the abandoned site. Hunters, hikers, and even researchers have reported sudden feelings of dread, inexplicable chills, and the sensation of being watched. Some claim to hear fleeting sounds, Soft moans, frantic scratching, or the distant laughter of children that vanish as soon as one attempts to locate their source. In the years after the trial, Crater Lake became a place where caution was more than a habit, it was survival. Families warned children not to wander near the mountains, even long after the house had burned. The twisted trees, gnarled and bent unnaturally, seemed to serve as reminders of the darkness that had once thrived there. Animals continued to avoid the area, and even the wind seemed to move differently through those woods, carrying whispers of suffering and the echo of long-forgotten screams. Psychologists and criminologists who later examined the case identified it as one of the most extreme examples of deliberate, systematic abuse coupled with a disturbing rationalization of scientific experimentation. The Oates twins were not impulsive killers. They were methodical, patient, and meticulous in their cruelty. Their obsession with heredity and isolation allowed them to create a controlled environment in which human life became nothing more than data points, specimens, and experiments. The surviving children's lives offered a grim testament to the damage inflicted over years of confinement and observation. Even with dedicated care, they were never able to fully reclaim what had been stolen from them, the ability to trust, to feel safe, and to develop normally. For the community, their suffering was both a reminder and a warning when human curiosity turns into obsession unchecked by conscience. The consequences are devastating and far-reaching. What remains most haunting is the question of how many other isolated corners of the world might conceal similar horrors, hidden away from the eyes of society. The Oates twins operated for nearly a decade, their crimes undetected because of geographic isolation, secrecy, and the assumption that families in remote regions acted differently. It is a chilling reminder that the veneer of civilization can be thin, and that cruelty can flourish in silence, unnoticed until it is too late. The legend of the Oates twins endures not only as a historical case but as a cultural warning. Scholars, writers, and storytellers have retold their story countless times, each version reinforcing the stark lesson: obsession, isolation, and rationalized cruelty are ingredients for unimaginable horror. Even today, those who dare to explore the forests of Oregon report an almost tangible sense of unease near the site, a persistent feeling that something of the past still lingers. Ultimately, the tale of Phoebe and Wilbert Oates challenges us to confront the uncomfortable truth about human nature. The deepest horrors are not always supernatural. They are often born from human hands, minds willing to cross boundaries that morality has carefully drawn. In their meticulous, cold-blooded experimentation, the twins created a world where innocence was destroyed in the name of obsession, where curiosity became a weapon, and where isolation allowed evil to flourish undisturbed. Even as decades pass, the shadows remain. The mountains, forests, and winds carry the story silently, warning those who listen that evil does not always announce itself. Sometimes, it hides quietly, studying, waiting, and ensuring that its lessons, however horrifying, are never forgotten. The legend of the Oates twins persists because it resonates with a universal fear that humanity's capacity for cruelty, rationalized and hidden, knows no bounds. Even decades after the Oates property burned to the ground, the story of Phoebe and Wilbert Oates refused to fade. Locals still speak of the twins in hushed tones, warning outsiders that some places in the mountains should never be approached. Though the house is gone, the land itself seems haunted. As if the soil absorbed the darkness that once thrived there, hikers report sudden chills, eerie whispers, and the feeling of unseen eyes tracking their every move. Animals avoid the area entirely, and even the wind carries an unnatural stillness, broken only by fleeting, unplaceable sounds. Occasionally, fragments of the past appear unexpectedly. Rusted tools, remnants of old foundations, and long-forgotten artifacts surface after storms or forest fires, as if the mountains themselves are reluctant to release their secrets. Some claim to glimpse shadowy figures moving between the trees, fleeting glimpses that vanish when looked at directly. Hunters who stray too close to the site speak of hearing cries that shift between human and animal, soft moans that curl the stomach and freeze the heart. Each report reinforces the chilling idea that the legacy of the Oates twins lingers, imprinted in the land and the memory of those who live nearby. The surviving children, the living witnesses to a decade of horror, carried their scars until their deaths. Their lives were quiet and constrained, never fully liberated from the trauma of their youth. Psychologists who later studied them noted patterns of severe anxiety, obsessive behaviors, and an inability to form normal emotional connections. In some ways, they were permanent reminders of the twisted experiments their parents conducted, a living echo of the cold calculations that had defined the Oates household. Modern researchers and true crime enthusiasts continue to study the case, poring over court records, letters, and contemporary accounts. Scholars debate the twins' motivations, dissecting the intersection of obsession, isolation, and consanguinity that allowed their atrocities to unfold. Some theorize that if left unchecked, similar horrors could emerge anywhere humans are removed from social oversight. The Oates twins became a cautionary tale for criminologists, ethicists, and psychologists alike. The human mind, when untethered from empathy and guided solely by curiosity or ideology, can commit acts beyond ordinary comprehension. In the Oregon mountains today, nature slowly reclaims what humanity abandoned. Trees grow over the old property, roots twisting over ruins, while wildlife cautiously returns, yet never fully occupies the space. The land feels different, almost alive with memory. Those who pass near the site sometimes swear they feel the weight of history pressing down, a heavy reminder that some events leave indelible marks on the earth itself. For the residents of Crater Lake, the story of the Oates twins remains a dark touchstone. Parents warn children about curiosity unchecked by morality, and travelers learn to respect the wilderness with more than just caution. They learn fear. The legend endures not just because of the crimes themselves, but because it reveals a truth that still resonates. Isolation enables secrets, obsession corrodes morality, and human cruelty can operate quietly, meticulously, and without remorse. The Oates twins are gone, and the house lies in ashes, but their legacy is woven into the mountains. Every twisted root, every hollowed tree, every whispering wind carries their story. The tale serves as a warning, a reminder that sometimes, the greatest horrors are not the creatures that haunt folklore, but the human capacity to rationalize evil and act upon it in secret. As night falls over the dense Oregon forests, the wind carries more than just leaves. It carries echoes of laughter and cries, of small hands pressed against walls, and of minds warped by calculated cruelty. For those who know the story, every shadow, every unfamiliar sound, is a question how many horrors remain hidden in the world, waiting for isolation to shield them. The mountains of Oregon may never tell, but they remember, and so does the legend of the Oates twins, eternal in its warning, relentless in its reminder. Some human horrors cannot be buried, no matter how remote the location or how long the years may pass. The story of Phoebe and Wilbert Oates transcends its immediate horrors to become something broader, a cautionary tale about the fragility of morality, the dangers of isolation, and the extremes of human obsession. While the twins themselves are long gone, their actions left ripples that extended far beyond the burned remains of their property. Communities, once tight-knit, became wary of outsiders, legends shaped local lore, and families told children to beware curiosity, unchecked by conscience. The Oates case transformed from a criminal investigation into a dark cultural memory, embedding itself in the Oregon mountains as an unspoken warning. Historians who examine the case note that the twins' meticulous records, their obsession with heredity and confinement, and their absolute lack of empathy make the events uniquely horrifying. This was not the result of a momentary lapse or sudden rage, but of a carefully calculated, years-long project, one conducted with precision and methodical planning. Every step, the concealment of children, the careful study of each subject, the elimination of anyone who might interfere, was deliberate. The Oates twins illustrate how knowledge and intellect, when divorced from humanity, can produce terror that rivals any natural or supernatural threat. The surviving children, though freed from the physical walls that confined them, lived with invisible chains. Their experiences serve as a grim reminder that trauma is not only immediate but lasting. Even with professional care, their recovery was limited. Some never learned to communicate fully, some remained bound by phobias and mistrust, and all carried the mental scars of years spent as human specimens. They were living proof that the consequences of cruelty extend far beyond the moment, shaping lives in ways both seen and unseen. The mountains themselves, silent witnesses to the horrors, continue to hold a peculiar power. Hikers and hunters report unease near the former property site, strange sounds, and fleeting shadows. These experiences, whether real or born of fear, reinforce the legend, keeping the story alive for generations. The Oates property may have vanished, but the atmosphere of dread remains, a subtle, almost imperceptible mark on the land. Ethicists, criminologists, and psychologists frequently reference the Oates case when discussing human cruelty and the boundaries of morality. The twins' unwavering belief in their own righteousness, combined with complete isolation, demonstrates how distorted thinking can justify the unthinkable. It challenges the assumption that humans, when educated or intelligent, are naturally ethical, highlighting the necessity of societal oversight and compassion in shaping behavior. Even today, the tale continues to intrigue and terrify. Podcasts, documentaries, and historical accounts examine the case, analyzing the twins' methods and motives, the community's reactions, and the chilling aftermath. Each retelling reinforces the lesson that evil does not always announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes it grows quietly, nurtured by secrecy, isolation, and rationalization. The legend of the Oates twins, therefore, serves a dual purpose as it is both a story of horror and a moral guidepost. It reminds us that vigilance is necessary, that isolation can be dangerous, and that humanity's capacity for cruelty is limitless when empathy is absent. The Oregon mountains, serene yet harboring hidden memories, hold this story in their shadows, ensuring that the deeds of Phoebe and Wilbert Oates are never truly forgotten. The echoes of the past continue to whisper through the trees. Every abandoned cabin, every neglected child, every isolated family carries the potential for similar darkness. The Oates twins are gone, but their story remains a warning etched into the memory of a landscape and its people that evil, when methodical and unobserved, can flourish in silence. And sometimes, it does. Though Phoebe and Wilbert Oates are long dead, the shadow of their deeds lingers. The Oregon mountains have reclaimed the property where so much horror unfolded, but locals still speak in hushed tones about the land's strange energy. Hunters report a sudden chill, a feeling of being watched, or distant, inexplicable sounds. The faintest echo of children who never learned to laugh. Even modern technology seems powerless to erase the sense of unease that pervades the area. The surviving Oates children, their lives fractured and marked by trauma, remind us that human cruelty leaves scars far longer than physical walls. Today, their stories are part of broader discussions on child welfare, the ethics of scientific curiosity, and the dangers of isolation. Psychologists cite the case as an extreme example of how environment, secrecy, and distorted ideology can warp human development. Sociologists note how fear and superstition amplified the legend, keeping neighbors silent and giving the twins a decade-long reign over their own private chamber of horrors. True, crime enthusiasts, historians, and paranormal researchers alike find the Oates property irresistible. Books and documentaries explore the twins' methods, the psychological impact on their children, and the eerie precision with which they executed their plans. Each new retelling asks the same chilling question: how many other, hidden laboratories of horror might exist, unnoticed in remote corners of the world? The Oates twins' story is more than history. It is a cautionary reflection on human potential for evil, often lurking quietly behind facades of normalcy. In the modern era, we can still learn from the horrors of the past. The Oates twins demonstrated that intellect without empathy is a dangerous force, and that secrecy and isolation can create conditions for unspeakable acts. Their legacy challenges us to remain vigilant, to recognize warning signs, and to protect the vulnerable. It reminds us that civilization is not a guarantee against cruelty. Rather, it is a fragile framework that requires constant attention, oversight, and moral accountability. Yet, for all its lessons, the story retains an unsettling power. Even today, the wind that sweeps through the Oregon mountains carries the whispers of the past. Some say the trees themselves seem twisted in quiet remembrance of the suffering endured on that land. The legend of the Oates twins endures as both a historical fact and a ghost story, a permanent reminder that the darkest chapters of human history are often written far from public view. Those who study, visit, or hear the tale are left with the same haunting question that gripped the community over a century ago. If cruelty can flourish unchecked in the shadow of isolation, how many secrets remain buried just beyond the edge of our knowledge? The Oates twins' reign of calculated terror may have ended, but their story continues to echo, forcing us to confront the uncomfortable truth that human hands, not supernatural forces, often craft the deepest horrors. The mountains may grow silent once more, the house may be gone, and the perpetrators may have faded into history, but the echoes remain, and for anyone brave, or foolish, enough to wander into the shadows of forgotten places, the legend of Phoebe and Wilbert Oates serves as a warning. The most terrifying monsters are not born of myth, but of methodical human ambition, hidden behind the veil of ordinary life. In the quiet corners of our world, where curiosity meets isolation, the Oates twins' story whispers still, and if you listen closely, you might just hear the faintest cry of the children who never truly lived, reminding us that some horrors, once conceived, are never fully extinguished. Decades have passed since the last echoes of the Oates twins faded from Crater Lake, yet the story refuses to die. It persists in whispers, in the twisting trees of the Oregon mountains, and in the uneasy feeling that grips anyone who wanders too close to where their house once stood. The property itself has long been reclaimed by nature, but those who know the tale speak of lingering shadows, inexplicable noises, and the subtle sense that something unseen still watches from the forest. The Oates twins' actions were extreme, but their story reflects a universal human truth, that evil does not always announce itself with thunder or lightning. Sometimes it grows quietly, nurtured by secrecy, isolation, and rationalization. Their obsession with science and heredity was a mask, a way to justify cruelty under the guise of study. It reminds us that intellect without empathy can become monstrous, and that moral detachment allows horrors to flourish, even in the most seemingly ordinary settings. Psychologists and historians continue to study the case, not merely for its gruesome details, but for its lessons about human behavior. They point out how fear and superstition allowed the twins to operate undisturbed, and how a community's reluctance to intervene can enable tragedy to take root. The Oates twins' story is both an historical record and a cautionary tale, showing the deadly consequences of secrecy, obsession, and the rationalization of cruelty. The surviving children's fates serve as a sobering reminder of the long-term cost of human monstrosity. Even with modern care, their development was forever stunted. Their lives were marked by trauma that no time, no attention, and no therapy could fully erase. They became living testaments to the dangers of prioritizing curiosity over compassion. The legend of the Oates twins persists because it forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. It asks us to consider the hidden horrors that might exist in isolation, the consequences of unchecked ambition, and the fragility of human morality. The mountains of Oregon keep their secrets well, but the story endures in the minds of those who study it, reminding us that some of the darkest chapters of humanity are written not by monsters of myth, but by human hands. And so, the wind still whispers through the ancient trees where the Oates house once stood, carrying faint echoes of the past. It is a warning, a memorial, and a chilling reminder. Evil often wears the face of normalcy, and the greatest horrors are sometimes those meticulously planned, executed, and rationalized in the silence of isolation. For those who dare to listen, the story of Phoebe and Wilbert Oates will always remain, a haunting reflection of human cruelty, obsession, and the unbreakable shadow it casts across time.